Well, howdy, everybody. Hope it's going well. I don't speak with a twang. I don't know why I did that. Today, I want to ask you a question. Do you have perfect pitch? Okay, and now I want to ask you a second question. Could you have perfect pitch? Now, statistically, if you're watching this from a country where there's a tonal language being spoken, you're like 10 times or 20 times more likely to have perfect pitch. Now, this alone would suggest that perfect pitch is learnable. But there's other sort of seemingly interesting things too. So, for example, in the West, we've pretty much decided that there's 12 and only 12 pitch classes. In other, uh, like for example, in Middle Eastern music, as a broad categorization, and like Arabic music, Iranian music, they have tons and tons of modes, like hundreds of modes. It's like the music of modes. So they have got the 7 modes that we have, and then they've got 93 plus more. So how does it make sense that some people are going to have innate ability to recognize the artificially determined 12 divisions of an octave? All right. Now, this is the reason why when I was 15 and heard some of these arguments, I was like, aha, I am going to teach myself perfect pitch. Now, at this point, I'd already been playing music a long time, been playing cello since I was 6, and I kind of always was close maybe to having, you know what I'm saying? Like, I would always have like an intuition about what the pitch is, even though I wasn't accurate with it most of the time, if that makes any sense. So what I wanted to do was to try to see whether I could hone that accuracy. Now, what I realized was the first pitch that I could 100% of the time accurately recall in my head was A, because I've heard that frickin' oboe or whatever instrument it was at the time giving the tuning note for the orchestra. Okay, now I got that in my head, right? You got to find a starting point, right? So this is my story, right? I'm just telling my story. So I was kind of able to just like be tossing around a melody in my head, use scales to connect the notes and be picturing kind of on the fingerboard because I knew the A, right? I knew what the A was. Try to find the next note. Where would that be if I know A? All right. Now, basically, I built this up. It didn't take me too long to be pretty quick with this. And then I plateaued and have gotten like gradually, incrementally better probably every year since. And so I have been interested in this for a while, this topic. And up to this point, what I knew about the subject was basically there's kind of 3 types of pitch recognition that I'd come across. So I certainly came across the people who had perfect pitch since they were very little. So usually 6 is when they realize that they have it. These people, this class of people I'm talking about, AP class. No, it's like absolute pitch, so AP. Anyway, whatever. AP class in high school. Anyway, it's a joke. Oh, I get jokes. So, anyways, so this first type, I knew I definitely wasn't. Look, so I did not need a reference point to like recognize a pitch or to be able to produce a pitch. Actually, sometimes if I'm just hearing a stream of notes, that alone, I'm not necessarily picking it up exactly right away. As soon as I have silence, though, and I can reference internally, I know what it is, right? So there is a different type of perfect pitch, one that is a little bit more perfect, one that is a little bit more innate. And when I ask these people about how they're perceiving pitches as they come in, like I would ask them, is it like seeing a color that you recognize, right? Oh, you just know that it's red, or you know, like, oh, I get it, that's blue. And they would say, no. Now, I don't know what they would say now, or I don't know exactly whether there's different ways to word the question, but it did seem like there was some different type of mechanism that was linking these people's brains to certain pitches. And interestingly, I met some people when I was at like posh music camps who knew perfect pitch based on fixed do. So like do, re, mi, fa, so. And they were like singing melodies to themselves, like, you know, oh my god, I can't even begin to wrap my head around how that's like a good way to think about pitches, but I know a lot of people who've literally done that. So anyways, I also know a type of player, basically people who, like me, got super obsessed with their instrument, you know, at that kind of critical age between like 10 and 15 or whatever, and practicing tons and tons of hours, and then basically you just end up, you kind of just know what pitches are, right? Like you just kind of know what they are. I don't know, because you have a familiarity with your particular instrument. So this sort of instrument-based perfect pitch is something that I've also encountered a lot, especially as I've gone to more places where there's just, really skilled and talented and dedicated musicians over the long term. That's also a thing. And then I also have known people, famous example of this would be Rick Beato, who's got an incredible ability to tell you with accuracy what the pitches are from a given starting point because his relative pitch is so well defined. That's actually been so inspiring to me that since I don't have the first type of perfect pitch, especially, I have actually been really honing in on my relative pitch, and that's been a massive improvement because I was using the perfect pitch that wasn't quite perfect as a crutch for a long time, and now that I'm adding in relative pitch awareness to that, but then using that to strengthen my pitch recognition, it's all just been a great feedback loop. So I do think that at the end of the day, we want all of these skills. All right, this has been a bit of a preamble to get me to today's article, something that I came across. It's actually, accepted November 3rd. Yeah, it just popped up in my, recommended reading. And it's called Learning Fast and Accurate Absolute Pitch Judgment in Adulthood. So this instantly piqued my interest. And let's read the abstract in full, and then we're going to kind of go over this paper and see what they found. So absolute pitch refers to the ability to identify the pitch of a tone without external references. Here, crucially, it is commonly believed that only individuals with special genetic makeup and early musical training within the critical period can develop absolute pitch. And that critical period would be between 1 and 3 years, roughly. Recent studies have begun to challenge the critical period notion by showing the possibility of AP acquisition in adults. However, the learning effects could be attributed to learning of pitch height instead of chroma. Here, the chroma is referring to the pitch class, extended working memory, relative pitch strategies like Rick Beato's, chance under repeated attempts, always there, pre-existing AP abilities, so the people who lied at the beginning, and/or specific cognitive profiles. All right, so they did a study. Let's skip to the bottom part because we're going to get into some of the specifics here in a second. Overall results provide more convincing evidence for the learnability of absolute pitch judgment in adult beyond the critical period, similar to most perceptual and cognitive abilities. So in that way, this is not that surprising. But okay, so let's go over, because in this in the beginning here, they actually go over something that is really crucial. All right, so they go over some statistics. They say in the West, it's 1 in 10,000 people, but 7 to 50% among well-trained musicians in conservatories. So that kind of also goes back to perhaps what I was saying a little bit about instrument-specific perfect pitch. So here, despite the previous findings, the learnability of absolute pitch judgment in adult remains inconclusive because of several methodological issues. So they go over 8. I think it's just important to quickly just talk about them. So first, it was often limited to 1 octave. So this is okay, so you're just kind of learning, oh, this, pitch was the one here, but it's not the full set of notes, right? Second, many tones were presented with their correct pitch names. So you could maybe, I see. Second, many were correct pitch names in the course of training. So previous studies would use glissando stimuli to provide auditory interference, which should minimize the use of these tones. However, it is possible that the auditory interference was not effective enough for some individuals with extended tonal memory because of their musical expertise. Okay, so that point is basically, you have to be careful when people can know what the pitches are, because if you let them know even just an inch, they're going to take a mile, and they're going to use all their fancy Rick Beato relative pitch strategies, and they're going to fake the test, and the research is ruined. Well, we'll get to that in a second, actually. It's kind of a funny one there. Third, due to a limited range of pitches used in previous studies, the pitch difference in tones of adjacent testing trials was relatively small. This made it easier to use relative pitch strategies. So again, we're just talking about the full reference of all pitches, right? Fourth, acquisition of absolute pitch ability was often demonstrated by successfully passing the last training level that included all 12 pitches. Although the performance requirement for the last training level was high, participants could have passed the final level by chance given unlimited attempts. Fifth, the two highest achievers in a previous AP training already attained a very high accuracy, proportionally correct 60 to 70% in an AP test before training. This performance level approached the average performance of real-world absolute pitch possessors in several previous studies. Also, the two participants reached a performance plateau after the first week of training, and the near-perfect accuracies stayed similar in the following 7 weeks. It is therefore possible that the absolute pitch abilities observed at post-test were existing to a large degree before training. All right, and then lastly, one of the trainings studies selected participants with high auditory working memory, which makes it unclear whether the observed absolute pitch learning could be generalized to the general population. Okay, so I think these are a lot of really good key issues, things that have always muddied the waters when talking about this, and there has always been like a bit of a stingy thing about whether it's even worth teaching absolute pitch strategies because you either have it or you don't. So again, I've just been very interested in this. Okay, so the goal of the current study was to examine the learnability after addressing the issues above. They engaged in 8 weeks of study. During training, they were presented a tone each time and clicked on its pitch name within a specific time window. As training progressed, more pitches were added. The methodological issues discussed above were addressed by the following design. First, tones in 3 octaves were included in the training to facilitate the learning of chroma instead of simply pitch height. They could have done more, but maybe for next time. Second, no feedback was provided during the post-test, including practice trials. So there's not going to be like during the practice trial, you know what the note is, and then later you're going to be able to have that through working memory, all right? Third, during the pre-post tests, lovely name there, successive testing tones were always more than an octave apart, all right? And this, combined with the relatively short window which to respond, reduced the effectiveness of any relative pitch strategy applied internally in one's mind. Fourth, to complete the training, participants were required to pass the final training level 4 times in a row with a wait time of at least 12 hours so that the mind can reset. The stable and consistent performance required would minimize the probability of fulfilling the accuracy criterion upon repeated attempts. Lastly, the participants were not screened with any cognitive abilities, and their AP performance was relatively low before training. So they're choosing your average slums is the goal. So here's an interesting hypothesis that they give, which I don't know if this study actually proves or not. Maybe you guys will have an opinion. If the development of AP ability is not constrained by the critical period and remains learnable in adulthood, there should be no glass ceiling for AP learning up to the performance level comparable to that of real-world absolute pitch possessors. In this case, the majority of participants should improve in pitch naming after training, and it should be possible for some participants to develop AP ability approaching or comparable to that of real-world AP possessors. I don't know if that is exactly the same. That's like saying that just because it's possible to learn cello as an adult means that it's like, you know, like realistically attainable to sound like the people who were serious about it from a young age, right? Like you can learn cello and become quite good at cello, but there's also people who from a young age learn cello and become quite good at cello. And surely there is still a difference there. At least this is my thinking going into it, but maybe that's not very scientific. But you can see here, they've got the training progress, and basically each one of these lines represents one of the participants. So they had 12 in the final. And so you can kind of see that for the most part, all of them improved. Actually, all of them improved, but then some of these people here plateaued. Okay, so as far as the participants go, and here's that funny story I was talking about. The sample size of this study was affected by dropout and slow training progress. Specifically, 10 withdrew who had completed 5 hours of training on average. Also, despite their strong interest in learning, 25 participants could not keep up with the expected time commitments of training, and completed 3.8 hours of training. This was likely caused by the voluntary nature. It occurred during the pandemic. Okay, that's fine. 13 participants who completed 10 hours of training or more within 8 weeks were invited for post-test. One participant was excluded from data analysis because during the post-test, she listened to 2 reference tones on her iPad during the break. Fucking B-word. Even though this was strictly prohibited. I just think it's funny. I mean, I'm glad that they found out or that she revealed it. It's better for the study. It's just kind of funny how, like, thrown under the bus she ends up becoming here. As a result, 12 participants were included in the analyses. They included 7 tonal and 5 non-tonal language speakers, 4 males, 7 females, and 1 non-binary gender. So here we get a little bit of a breakdown. I'll link to this, and this PDF is free. There's no paywall. So you can go through and look a little bit more at how they were actually doing everything. But I'm just going to highlight a couple of key points here. So 1, to make the best use of participants' training time, we also introduced a level jumping mechanism. This allowed participants to jump to a higher level that matched the demonstrated level. So you could only progress after 90% accuracy. When the number of trained pitches was 5 or above, 2 special exercises were added, additionally provided every 15 attempted training levels so as to pinpoint individual learning needs. Okay, a little bit further, because as far as this video, we're not as concerned with all these specifics. Some graphs, nice. We're interested in kind of jumping to these results here. So, on average, participants completed 21.4 training hours, 15,000 training trials. At the end of the training, participants were exposed to 11.08 pitches on average. So remember, the way they were doing this is starting with 1 pitch, and then you get pitches plus or minus 1, and then you get plus 2 and minus 2. So you're kind of expanding, I guess, in a similar way to the way that I had learned. Starting from 1 pitch, you expand to the other. So not everybody made it basically to where they're all doing 12, and that's what that number means. And we're able to name 7 pitches, which we'll get back to that in a second, with an accuracy of 90% or above. Now, that is absolutely fascinating because 7 pitches, notably, is how many pitches there are in the major scale and all of its modes. So, at least as far as music in the West here goes, in most keys, it's 7 notes. So that's actually fantastic, because that functionally adds so much. Like if you were to accurately, reliably get 7 notes, which I think for a while, that's like what it was for me too. Like I would still have a tendency to hear like a G flat sometimes as a G or an A flat as an A. And sometimes I still do that too, because it's like, oh, it's slightly, it's like what I would picture for the fingering, but then I'm off a little bit by half step. So I think that even to the extent that it's like, I've learned to overcome that now, it still comes from a place of, it was a little bit more natural to have like a set of 7 tones, like actually that deep. But here they claim the attained performance after training is unlikely to be explained by pre-existing abilities. The 2 participants who acquired accurate and fast AP performance did show higher AP accuracies than others during pre-test, proportional correct, 0.36, the same, I guess. However, individuals with such high performance were rarely considered AP possessors because their accuracy was lower than half the frequency demonstrated by real-world AP possessors, which you'll remember they had claimed as 70%, which I think is actually kind of crazily low. Importantly, it took them 18 and 21 hours to complete the training with slow and gradual improvement. So, therefore, it's likely that their ability improved. I also think this is important, that they didn't find necessarily a correlation between the pre-test performance and the post-test. So here they kind of get back to their core hypothesis, and the current findings are inconsistent with the core assumption of the 2-component model. This cognitive model explicitly states most people can perceive tones presented in isolation and form AP memory well, but only a selected few can overcome the difficulty in pitch labeling. However, all participants in the current study learned to quickly and accurately name at least a subset of the pitches, from 7 to all 12 pitches in 2 individuals. The continuous distribution found in the current and previous training studies show that apart from perceiving isolated tones and establishing absolute pitch memory, most people can associate verbal labels with tones in an absolute manner. Our findings provide additional evidence that exposure to tonal languages is not an essential condition for learning AP judgment in adulthood. I also think that kind of makes sense just given the 7 to 50% of music students who have it too, because they're not all going to come from that either. So future studies might directly compare the development among tonal and non-tonal language speakers, which they don't think is necessary but could lead to differences. Okay. Some researchers may have concerns about the above interpretations of the findings. First, some may question whether the performance of the 2 highest achieving participants should be regarded as true AP. Wow, gatekeep much? In the literature, true AP refers to AP that is highly accurate, fast, effortless, and automatic. This is often considered categorically different from other forms, quasi, partial, implicit, or pseudo, which generally refer to AP with lower accuracy, limited to a subset of pitches, or expressed in terms of perceptual discriminality rather than explicit labeling. Apart from performance level, it is also reported that some true AP possessors can accurately produce a tone of certain pitch absolutely, and others can better differentiate between tuned and mistuned tones. So, kind of not even a single concept, perhaps, to begin with, right? Importantly, the literature does not have any consensus about what performance level true AP represents. Many studies have simply relied on self-report to categorize participants. Notably, the 2 highest achieving participants in the current study, based on the accuracy and speed of their AP judgment, would be categorized as true in more than 80% of the published papers. So given that it is representative of the literature to consider these 2 participants true AP, researchers who question the appropriateness of this interpretation should explicitly define the alternative level of performance. So there you go, if you were questioning this. All right. So just quick summary. Yes, you can learn. Yes, there are tools you can do. Probably just looking it up online. Probably just thinking about it. Probably if you play an instrument, like starting there. Maybe the oboe tuning the orchestra is a trick that works for you too if you spend a lot of time in orchestras. But either way, a lot more can be done here than we have thought. All right? So that is your... So that is the lesson from today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, learning this subject. Check out the link below, and I'll see you in whatever crazy video is next.